Good morning. My name is Ron Morris. This is Moving Forward TV, your local real estate and mortgage update.
And I am Delynn Gaston. Welcome to our first show of 2012. Okay, today's show we wanted to talk about closings and in particular what it takes to get there. In the month of December, it has come to our attention that with everybody and their brother and their mother and their aunts and their uncles and their sisters, trying to get closings to happen either before Christmas or before year end, and everything gets crunched up right at the end there, and stress levels have a tendency to rise.
To increase. Several years ago, I read an article, I think it was the Wall Street Journal, that mentioned mortgage closings, in particular purchases, that's kind of what we're talking about, are the third most stressful time in one's life, behind death and divorce. So keep that in mind when you're communicating with the buyers and the sellers out there.
So we thought it would be a good idea to kind of like let you know what goes on behind the scenes, so to speak, what we're doing on our end to make sure that the closings get to the table on schedule.
First, let's talk about realistic time frames. What happens when the application is taken, what needs to happen, and what can cause delays if it doesn't happen.
First and foremost, up front, if you can get us the contract and, very importantly, the title person's contact information as soon as possible, because quite frankly, we can't really start an application until we have that, only because we have to do the good faith estimate. With these new good faith estimates that we're working with in the last year, if we're off, guess whose pocket it comes out of? Ours. So we can't be off on our good faith estimate. So we have to get a preliminary HUD as soon as possible from the title
and we can't stress that enough. We cannot do our paperwork to get the application started without title information. We can't do it without it. So that's imperative. First and foremost, get the contract and, like you mentioned, title information over to the loan officer ASAP. Next, return the appraiser's phone call and be prepared with comps and non-comps, whatever applies.
Right. Especially on those non-comps. If something in the area is absolutely not a comp, you know that house is trashed inside. Let the appraiser know that. We've mentioned that in appraisal shows before. And then the other thing is stay in touch with us, stay in touch with, most of you do, I'm sure, stay in touch with us, stay in touch with the clients, because sometimes we ask them for a bunch of stuff, which we're getting into next, and it's not coming. And if you guys are on top of them and we're on top of them, it kind of all
They might see the importance of it then.
Okay, so what are we doing? What is going on behind closed doors once we take that application?
I'm getting going fishing.
He's going fishing. I'm working now. What happens when we take the application? From the time the customer signs it, we have technically 3 days in which to get certain disclosures out.
Which we typically do right then and there at application time, but they do give you 3 days.
Right, we usually do it right away. Now, one of the new things in our latest guidelines and regulations that the government put down on us that we have to do is we have to wait until the customer has 3 days to review those documents before we can order the appraisal, or in layman's terms, technically before we can spend their money is how the government puts it, to order an appraisal. So there's some...
That can be up to 6 days then.
Right.
3 days for disclosure, 3 days to wait for them to review those disclosures before we can order that appraisal.
Right. The other thing is underwriting, pre-underwriting. We have to pre-underwrite all of these files. We get it into our processor. Our processor, basically her job is to tear the whole thing apart and pre-underwrite it, put it back together again. We put the best thing together. We give the customer a list of stuff to get. As we start getting these documents back, we're reviewing them. It's not just like you get the pay stubs and you put them in. You have to look at the pay stub and make sure.
I have a great story on that. I just took a new application and the individual got me the W-2s, the pay stubs, all that stuff.
Right.
There were 3 different employers on the W-2s and 1099s. He had only told me about 2 jobs.
Okay.
So when I questioned that, fortunately I caught it before my processor did, which is a surprise, but I did, and I'm like, well, there's a small W-2 from XYZ company, what's the deal? Oh, I forgot to tell you that. I left for 3 months, my employer, then I went back after 3 months. Well, I need to know that. And it could confuse an underwriter, but fortunately we caught it prior to it going to underwriting. Right. But that's just a small example of the things we try to pick up on before it gets to underwriting.
And the 4506 would have come back with some interesting things on it. So it's not just a matter of just gathering the stuff and sending it in. We have to really look at it closely these days, because the underwriters, their job is to tear the whole thing apart and put it back together again and make sure it makes sense. So those are the things. So it takes probably a good week before we can actually submit it into underwriting, because we're trying to answer all these little questions. Right. You write a little letter about, okay, he
Right.
went to this job and he came back, whatever it might be. There's letters,
Client
letters,
forgot
letters,
to get you a couple of little
letters.
things. Well, I'll get you that tomorrow.
Right.
3 days later, we get it.
So that's real important. And then it goes into underwriting. And like I said, their job is tear the whole thing apart and put it back together again and make sure it makes sense. Once underwriting, it comes out of underwriting and it is approved, they give us a laundry list of stuff that we need, the
Right,
condition list or the steps. Then we start gathering these steps. That's when we kind of have a good idea, okay, this is good. These are going to be pretty easy to hit. I'm really, these are good. Or a problem has come up. They forgot to tell us about this or that or whatever it might be and something. And that's when we have to address that. Keeping in mind the time frames, it takes a number of days to get everything together to make sure it gets back in on time.
Again, let's recap the realistic time frames. We're at time of application, we're taking a day or two for loan setup
Right.
to get that application going, get all my documentation that I need.
And it goes into compliance, loan setup to compliance to make sure
A couple days there at
loan setup
at
did
least.
everything right and we did everything right.
Then you're going to have about 2, depending on the lender, time of year, all that wonderful stuff,
Right.
2 to 4 days in underwriting.
Which is not bad. But then again, it goes to a compliance check to make sure the underwriter did everything right and she
Right.
didn't miss or he didn't miss anything either.
Then 2 to 4 days in STIPs and compliance. I think that you just kind of touch base on
That's
that.
the hard part, and that could be the sticky part because sometimes the people getting the stuff, they're really good getting it to us up front, and this is when we kind of need you guys to kind of like help us stay on top of them to get those STIPs in so that we can get it back into underwriting.
And once
condition clearing.
exactly, once we get those STIPs cleared, we get our clear to close. You're still 2 to 4 days through QC,
Right.
and to
Final
prepare closing
compliance
docs.
check, final compliance check, and then the closing compliance check, closing docs and the compliance check there. So there's, because of all the fraud over the last few years, several layers of compliance check that we have to go through. I was saying just recently to a couple of realtors at a closing, what used to take one document, what was one form, is now
true.
3 forms to say
Right.
the exact same thing. So there's extra paperwork, extra documentation, and a lot more extra checks
point.
that go into
Right.
place to get a loan to the closing table. So bear with us. Keep those time frames in mind. No more of these fast closings.
Well, and I think what used to typically be a 20 to 25 day time frame, going back a number
Right.
of years, is now a 30 to 35 day time frame.
Right.
Really under the best of circumstances too. Try to kind of remember that when you're writing those contracts too. I know as a loan officer, when I have a contract come in and they give me 45 days, I am really, really liking and
Thankful.
enjoying that. We'll close early, but when they give me 30 and it takes 32, 10, things tend to get a little stressful from time to time.
That's our show this week. Thanks so much for watching. Again, remember, we're here to help you guys get your packages to closing
Yeah.
as quickly as possible.
And
Feel
any
free to call
questions
us.
about what we talked about today,
Yep.
anything mortgage related, possibly title related, anything like that, reach out to us. Call us, email us. Can they do that social stuff?
Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, all of those are on as well. Thanks so much. We are Today and Every Day.
Moving forward, we'll see everybody next week.
Bye-bye.